Reactions and takeaways from the Texas Longhorns scrimmage this past Saturday.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions do apply. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, everything you need to know from Saturday's scrimmage. In the first segment, I kind of just give you all the information that I've gathered, what took place in the scrimmage on Saturday. In the second segment, my reaction to everything that took place in the scrimmage on Saturday. And then in the third segment, the Texas softball team got their first series win against that Oklahoma juggernaut in softball since 2009. That's worth talking about on the show. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the super long offseason for college football, the way too long offseason for college football is scooting along, right? We are more than halfway through spring practices. Next Saturday marks the orange and white game for the 2024 football team. We're about 4 months and some change away from playing Colorado State. And, before we know it, we'll look up and we'll be, 14 days away, then 7 days away, and then it'll be here. So, like I said, the college football offseason is way too long, 8-9 months at times for teams, depending on how far you play into the season. But, it moves pretty fast, just as time moves way too fast, period, and like I said, we're 4 months away from the Colorado State game, and sooner than later, we'll look up, we'll be in fall camp, and it'll be right around the corner. So the Texas football team had a scrimmage this past Saturday, a lot of good nuggets coming out of what took place in the scrimmage. It was closed from Horns 24/7, Inside Texas, and just various people on Twitter, right, that somehow, find a way to get this information. So in the first segment, like I said, just kind of going over the information that I was able to gather from multiple sites in the internet on what took place in the scrimmage on Saturday. The second segment, my reaction to just kind of this Texas football team in the spring as a whole and what took place in the scrimmage on Saturday. And then the third segment, talking about the Texas softball team getting a monster series win against the Oklahoma Sooners in that sport of softball where Oklahoma has dominated like no other, right? It's one of the best dynasties we've seen in sports, period, right? So in terms of what happened in Saturday in the scrimmage, the first thing that really stood out to me from everything I read and gathered was that the defense definitely got the better of the offense for the majority of the day, right? With the offense winning the red zone portion to end the scrimmage. So in the true 11-on-11 portion, offense against defense, multiple sources, right? It was on Horns 24/7 Inside Texas, said that the defense got the better of the offense throughout the day. And, at the end of the practice, where it's best on best, red zone, the offense was able to wear down the defense. Maybe they're tired, whatever, and they was able to win that period. But for the most part, right, like overall on the day, the consensus is that the defense got the better of the offense in Saturday's scrimmage. And I think that's encouraging to hear that from the defensive side of the ball, right? Obviously, your first thought is, well, damn, what was going on with the offense, right? But the good thing is all of these players wear burnt orange and white with Texas across their chest. So if the defense had a really good day, that's really good, right? Even if it means the offense wasn't as sharp as we're used to. So it's encouraging to hear that the defense had a strong performance. One, with that side of the ball being the biggest question mark, I think, going into the 2024 season. If you polled fans or asked fans which side of the ball they were more comfortable with going into 2024, I would have to believe at least, right, 92, 93% would say the offense, right? I think most, fans would be less comfortable, especially with what we lost, right? It starts with Tamondre Sweat and Byron Murphy up front, more comfortable with the offense and less comfortable with the defense going into the season. But to hear that the defense kind of got the better of the offense this past Saturday in the scrimmage should be really encouraging for Texas fans in terms of that side of the ball, right? And so, that side of the ball being a big question mark is a really good sign that they had a good scrimmage on Saturday, and the offense that they're going against in practice, right? Like, how many offenses will the defense face this year that are comparable skill position wise and quarterback wise and Steve Sarkisian wise, right, on this Texas offense. Like, how many other offenses will they face that can put the type of personnel on the field that Texas can? Probably none. Right. And so if you're able to stop or stifle or hold down this offense in practice, then you should be able to go out there and do that against every offense you'll face this college football season, or damn near every offense you'll face this college football season. It was mentioned that in the 11-on-11 portion of practice, the offense had very little highlight plays. That definitely can be concerning, right? When I just talked about the level of talent you have on the field, when you have a 3-year quarterback in Quinn Ewers, or going into his 3rd season at Texas, when you have a mastermind offensively like Steve Sarkisian, you would expect the offense to go out there and be crisp and make, highlight plays all over the field in this offense. But, as mentioned before, it seems like the defense got the better of them on this day, right? They said the offense had very little highlight plays, and the defense did a really good job of competing and, making plays in the run game and then limiting the passing game overall. In terms of the defense, players that stood out or players that were mentioned after Saturday's scrimmage is David Benda, which is huge because he's stepping up in that Jalen Ford role as our primary linebacker and the leader of that group. And so it's good to see, after Jalen Ford posted, All-American level season in 2022 and then followed that up with a really good season in 2023. David Benda has big shoes to fill, not only as a leader, but as a player in the middle of that defense. It's good to see him having a strong scrimmage this past Saturday. He also had a sack in the scrimmage, which will be huge for his role this year. Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, right? Vernon Broughton was mentioned as being very active, especially defending the run at the line of scrimmage. And Alfred Collins is somebody who we've heard pretty good things about, right, since the start of the spring, not only in terms of his play on the field, but his overall mindset that he's brought to these practices. That was mentioned in the press conference by Steve Sarkisian. So to hear that Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton had a really good day up front, especially against the run game in the 11-on-11 portion, and were able to get in the backfield, is a really good sign when you're replacing players like Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. And then Anthony Hill and Colin Simmons, who I think are just 2 of the best defensive players in the country, period. And just the type of athletes and the type of pedigree of defensive players we haven't had for a long time at the 40 acres. They were both mentioned as standouts as well. And Colin Simmons, along with David Benda, had a sack in Saturday's scrimmage. So those are going to all be players that are going to have huge roles for you on this football team this year for this Texas defense to be as good or better than they were last season. And it's good to see those top players on your defense standing out from Saturday's scrimmage. Once the offense and defense transitioned into the red zone work, the offense ran the ball down their throat to end the practice. Kelvin Banks, Cam Williams, and Trevor Gooseby were all mentioned as players that were absolutely moving people in the run game when they got down in the red zone and dominated that portion of the practice. And even though you would expect them to be able to run the ball at a high level at all times or be able to play offense at a high level at all times, right? It's good to see that an area that Texas was not good in last year in terms of red zone offense. I think they were like 100th or worst in the country in terms of red zone scoring percentage. It's good that when they got into the red zone on Saturday, right, even though the entire day didn't go well for them, when they got in the red zone on Saturday, they were very efficient, scored a touchdown on every drive, and were able to dominate and move people in the run game, especially when those same players that you moved, and were able to open up holes against were the same players that were, kind of shutting you down in the run game earlier in the day. So once again, Kelvin Banks, Cam Williams, and Trevor Gooseby all mentioned as players that did really good in the red zone period and opened up holes in the run game. Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner were really good in the red zone portion. They were mentioned as 2 of the best offensive players on the day, period, which is really good to see. And Cedric Baxter also dominated and scored a touchdown in the red zone period. But Cedric Baxter did have a fumble on the day. That's why Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner were mentioned as the 2 best offensive players and 2 best running backs in the entire Saturday scrimmage. It was mentioned that there weren't a ton of passing highlights or a bunch of rhythm in the passing game, which is a little bit concerning. There was a deep throw from Arch Manning to Amari Nyblack for a touchdown. It was one of the best plays on the day. Also, Quinn Ewers to Gunnar Helm for a long play that set up a touchdown was another, really good passing play that was mentioned on multiple sites. And they said that Ryan Wingo and Jonte Cook had 2 very impressive catches on the day. So we've heard spectacular things from the beginning of the offseason about Ryan Wingo and Jonte Cook. And then DJ Campbell at right guard was replaced by Cole Hudson early for what is being labeled as a shoulder injury, but it does not seem to be serious. So that is kind of what took place on Saturday in the scrimmage, just based on what I've read from Inside Texas, Horns 24/7, and other various outlets online and on social media. A quick word from our sponsors, and now get into my takeaways from Saturday's scrimmage. I told you everything that happened, but what does that all necessarily mean? Quick word from our sponsors, and then I get into that. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. And remember, terms and conditions do apply. All right, continuing to talk about the Texas football team and the scrimmage that took place on Saturday. And now my biggest takeaways from, everything that I mentioned in the first segment and everything that I was able to gather since the scrimmage took place. The first thing is that the articles mentioned that the runs given up in the red zone period had more to do with bad run fits than the personnel. Overall, our run defense held up well on the day. I think that's important because when you lose players like Sweat and Murphy, your instant thought, if the run game or run defense is not the same, is, well, damn, it's because of a drop off in talent from, Sweat and Murphy to Broughton and Collins or whoever's going to be in there in the rotation at the time. Right. But it's a good thing to hear that their run fits just weren't great. Right. They weren't in a great position in the run game. Right. They didn't attack the run lanes well. Right. Or with great discipline. And that's why the offense was able to run it down their throat more so than the offensive line just being better than who we have on our defensive line, right? Because it's a lot easier to clean up your run assignments, right, and be more disciplined in your run defense assignments than to say we just don't have the personnel to stop the run at a high level. So it sounds like it wasn't a case of, well, we have Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins, so we just can't stop the run. It just sounds like they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's why the offense was able to get it together and run the ball down their throat in the red zone. So that's something that can be fixed, especially over the next 4 months, right? Being more disciplined and being more attentive in terms of where you're supposed to be in your run lanes and not giving up those big runs that can break your back as a run defense. We did a really good job of that last year, being the 3rd best run defense in the country. And it sounds like we have the players to be a really good run defense this year again. They just have to learn how to be more disciplined, attack the right gaps, and stop those, 2-3 yard runs from turning into 15-20 yard runs. Second thing is passing game lacking rhythm is concerning, but there are a ton of new pieces, right? You would expect coming into the season that the passing game would hit on all cylinders, right? As I mentioned, Steve Sarkisian, offensive mastermind, Quinn Ewers, year 3, they talked about the maturation and just command he has on this offense and this football team and how accurate and consistent he's looked since the start of practices compared to previous years. But, with that being said, he did lose his 3 top targets, right? Really his 4 top targets in the passing game in Jordan Whittington, JT Sanders, Xavier Worthy, and Adonai Mitchell. And so even though you put a bunch of talent around him, right, that talent still has to mesh, right? He still has to build rapport with Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, Silas Bolden when he gets on campus, Matthew Bolden, Isaiah Bond, and whoever else, right? Ryan Wingo and whoever else. And then continue to build rapport with the tight ends as well, with Gunnar Helm, Amari Nyblack, Juan Davis, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to attribute the lack of passing game rhythm to, Quinn Ewers and Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning working with a lot of new targets, but you would expect with experienced quarterbacks, right, and so much talent on the outside that this passing game would be able to hit on all cylinders. But the good thing is the defense that's stopping them are in burnt orange and white and have Texas across their chest. They're obviously pretty familiar with what Texas wants to do, so maybe they have an advantage in practices that, of course, other defenses won't have. And like I said, the passing game lacking rhythm could be attributed to a bunch of new faces in the building and, the quarterbacks building rapport with those receivers against a really good defense, a really talented defense. So it is a little concerning, but it's early. They still got 4 months to iron out the kinks. I think we'll see a very explosive passing offense this season. And once again, I'm not going to, press the panic button or anything like that. I'm just going to attribute it to a lot of new faces and having to build that rapport with new receivers for quarterbacks like Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers. The bread and butter of this team is running the ball and playing really good defense, especially up front on the run. And because of that, this team will always have a high floor, right? I think that even this year, there's going to be periods of inconsistency in the passing game. We're already seeing it in practices, right? And anything, or what we know, if we know one thing, It's that when we get these reports about what's happening in the spring, a lot of times these are, kind of microcosms of what we're going to see in the season, right? We heard a lot at times last year we couldn't run inside and things like that. And then there were times during the season where we couldn't run inside, right? So there's always little nuggets that come out during the spring that end up being true throughout the season, right? Like you are who you are as a football team. Not everything is going to change between now and August 31st. And so, I think there's going to be times where there's inconsistency in the passing game. I think there's also going to be times where maybe there's inconsistency in the pass rush or inconsistency in the coverage on the back end, right? But I do think what this team can show up and do every week is run the ball at a high level and stop the run at a high level. And because they'll be able to do that, regardless of what happens in the passing game, offensively or defensively, I think this team has a high floor, and I think they can go into every game with a chance to win that game because they can run the ball and hopefully continue to stop the run at a high level this season. Trevor Goosby continues to be a name we hear repeatedly, and I'm very excited to see him potentially as a starting tackle next season. It's been a long time since we had to replace a tackle at the University of Texas and didn't necessarily know, what the succession plan would be for, the tackle that was there before them, right? With Kelvin Banks, he came in right as a, starting left tackle in 2021 and then gave us 2. And then now this is going to be his 3rd year as a starter at that position, right? Christian Jones was the starter, but we always knew when he left that Cam Williams would more than likely take over that position at right tackle. But now we have the question to answer of who's going to be the left tackle when Kelvin Banks leaves, right? Or if Cam Williams has a monster year and decides to leave after starting for 1 season, who's going to be the right tackle if Cam Williams decides to move on, right? So you're potentially replacing 2 tackles next year and definitely going to have to replace 1 since Kelvin Banks will be a high draft pick. And we've always wondered, kind of who would be the player to step in, right? After you've had really good and solidified tackle play for the last 3 years. And Trevor Goosby, seems like a prime candidate either on the left or right side. You've obviously brought in 5-star Brandon Baker, who I think has to fit in those plans sooner or later. But Trevor Goosby all spring has just been mentioned as a player that is moving people. He's athletic and looks like he can be great in the run game and the passing game on that offensive line, and it's good to have depth and a player like that probably would start for most schools in the country that's sitting behind 2 really talented tackles in Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams. But I think next year when Kelvin Banks moves on, Trevor Goosby will have one of those starting spots. The only question is, will it be on the left or the right side? And it's good to see him having an impact early, right now as a backup, because when you put him in as a starter, it should be, 100 miles and running. Very encouraging to hear the defense had 2 sacks, especially 1 from Colin Simmons. I think it's going to be huge. We talked about last year, the safety play and the edge play, right? Or just the pass rush in general lacked a little bit, right? Especially in the most key moments. So it's good to see that the defense is getting to the quarterback, and getting sacks. And, I think that Colin Simmons can change the outlook of this defense when you put a NFL level talent on this defense, even as a true freshman. And so it's good to see that already, in the scrimmage, he's making game-changing plays, albeit in practice against his teammates, right? Regardless of fit in the offense, I'm adamant, at least right now, that Jaden Blue needs more touches than Cedric Baxter. I know Cedric Baxter is a better fit in the inside zone offense, but it feels like this is the last year we're going to have Jaden Blue at the 40 acres. And I think Jaden Blue is one of the most explosive players in the country, regardless of position. Yeah, just period. Like, I think Jaden Blue is a Heisman level running back if you give him enough touches, right? And I think we're going to make the mistake of featuring Cedric Baxter, right? We're also going to have a 3rd running back that's going to get some touches. And I just don't want to see a scenario where Jaden Blue does not get the ball enough, right? I think Jaden Blue should be getting the ball 15 to 20 times a game. I think anything less than that is criminal, right? I understand Cedric Baxter was the 5-star. I understand Cedric Baxter is a better fit to run inside in this inside zone offense, but sometimes it's just about giving your best players the ball more than everybody else, right? And I think at the running back position, we need to find a way to give Jaden Blue the ball more than anybody else in that room, even if somebody else gets more carries. Like, I don't even care if Jaden Blue gets 10 carries a game and 10 catches a game, and Cedric Baxter gets 15 carries a game. Like, Jaden Blue needs to touch the ball more than anybody else in the running back room, period. Ryan Wingo may not play because he's a freshman, but he's day 1 ready as a freshman. Since the beginning of the offseason, we've heard nothing but rave reviews about Ryan Wingo. And if we didn't have Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, the list goes on and on with experience in front of him. I think Ryan Wingo could step into most programs and be a dog as a true freshman, right? I think even right now on this team, he could step in and have a role, but you have so many mouths to feed that are experienced and that have been here in the system. It's hard to see him having a huge role from day one, but he is ready from day one from everything we've heard. Size, speed, route running, nuance, poise, maturity. He has the makings of a number one wide receiver at the 40 acres, and he's already showing that before his freshman season, right? Tough decisions to make at corner, but that's because of how well you have recruited, right? Between Malik Muhammad and Gavin Holmes, Austin Jordan, Jalen Gilbo, Kobe Black, Terrence Brooks, and Jade Barron, only 3 can play at a time, right? But like I said, we have 6 to 7, maybe even 8 corners that can play at a high level for the Texas football team. So, you definitely have some tough decisions to make on how you're going to deploy those corners and who's going to play. But the reason you have a tough decision to make is because of how well you've recruited and how much talent you have on the back end coming out of high school and out of the portal. And Trey Moore and Colin Simmons are changing life for Texas in the edge room. I think that Justice Finkley is a really good player, right? I think that Colton Vasek, Ethan Burke, and Barron Sorrell are really good players, right? But I think Trey Moore and Colin Simmons have the potential to be elite edge rushers for this football team and move the needle in ways that Vasek, Sorrell, Burke, Finkley, et cetera, just can't, right? I think that Trey Moore and Colin Simmons are NFL level pass rushers, like, wreck your game plan level pass rushers, where I think that the other players I mentioned are really, really good college pass rushers and really, really good depth, right? But I think in terms of having superstars at the edge, Trey Moore and Colin Simmons represent those types of players, right? And I think both of them will change life for Texas this year in terms of the edge room, especially given the production that we've gotten over the last couple of seasons. It's been good, not great. I think Trey Moore and Colin Simmons have the potential to bring great pass rushing to this team this year with a ceiling of elite. Thank you for tuning in. Excuse me. Not thank you for tuning in. But a quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the Texas softball team once again beating Oklahoma in a 3-game series for the first time since 2009. All right, getting out of here talking about the Texas softball team. If you know anything about college softball, you know that Oklahoma is just the juggernaut of all juggernauts, right? When we talk about the Patriots dynasties, when we talk about the Warriors dynasty, right? The Chiefs, if they're currently on a dynasty. In baseball, we talk about the Yankees. Overall, right? Or in college basketball, we talk about UConn, right? And the women's. Oklahoma, right, can make an argument that they're up there with all of those dynasties, right? And maybe could even make the argument that they're more impressive than some, right? Now, obviously, of course, most people would weigh professional sports over college sports. But what Oklahoma has been able to do in softball and the stranglehold that they've had on softball, especially when Jocelyn Allo was at the University of Oklahoma, is insane, right? So, I mean, even beating Oklahoma one game, right, beating them one time is a hell of an accomplishment, let alone beating them in a 3-game series. And that's something that Texas, who has had a really good softball program as well, has not been able to do since 2009 until this weekend when they took 2 out of 3 games against the Oklahoma Sooners. So on Friday night, Texas lost 5-2, right, in the first game of the series. Texas would struggle offensively, only having 2 base runners in the first 6 innings of that game. Oklahoma scored 2 runs in the third and then took a 5-0 lead against Texas in the fifth with a 3-run home run from Jada Coleman. Texas did rally in the 7th and made things interesting, plating 2 runs, but a nicely hit ball to the hot corner to the third baseman ricocheted directly to the shortstop, and they were able to get the last out of the game, ending the game 5-2. So Oklahoma beat Texas on Friday night. For Texas to win their first series against Oklahoma, they would have to win on Saturday and Sunday. And on Saturday and Sunday, they beat the Oklahoma Sooners. Starting on Saturday, Oklahoma jumped out to an early lead in the first with a single to make it 1-0, but Texas would take a 2-1 lead in the fourth with 2 separate RBI doubles, right? As Citlali Gutierrez was pitching the 7th, she retired the first 2 batters before allowing a 2-out single up the middle, and then she allowed a double, right? So things looked interesting as the base runner from first base was coming around trying to score and make the score 2-2 on a double, right? Yeah, a double was hit, and the runner's trying to come around all the way from first to score, right? With the score being 2-1 and this potentially being the last out, right? So things are interesting. Things are crazy at this moment. But a perfect relay from the center fielder, Caden Henry, to shortstop, Viviana Martinez, to the catcher, Reese Atwood, allowed her to apply the tag on the runner from first and get the 21st and final out at the plate, giving the Longhorns the win on Saturday and giving them a chance to win the series and the rubber match on Sunday, which they did, again, winning 2-1. Oklahoma took a 1-0 lead for the third consecutive game of the series, this time in the third inning. But after a hit by pitch got a runner on base, Katie Stewart hit a 2-run homer in the fourth inning to give the Longhorns the 2-1 lead, and that score would hold for good. Estelle Zek would come in and get the last 10 outs of the game. She came in the fourth inning with a runner on second base, I believe, but then she got that out and then got all 9 outs in the fifth, sixth, and seventh, holding Oklahoma scoreless to clinch the rubber match and the series once again for the first time since 2009. So shout out to the Texas softball team doing big things, the top 5 team in the country, and getting that huge monkey off their back and finally beating Oklahoma in a weekend series once again for the first time since 2009. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.